Hi. In this video, I'm going to show you 5 questions about Texas history that modern historians get wrong. My name is Jeff Murrah, and I am an amateur historian and a 6th generation Texan. And one thing most people don't know is that there are numerous misconceptions about Texas history. And in this video, I'm going to debunk some of them so you can have a better idea of understanding about what's going on. I decided to go ahead and do this video because lately there has been a plethora, just a huge amount of misconceptions about Texas history, flooding the internet, books coming out that, I wouldn't even bother to read. They're so misleading. But anyways, I'm going to deal with some of those issues here today. Now, one question that often comes up, was Texas stolen from Mexico? Okay. Because there are some people that believe that Texas was stolen from Mexico and that Texas rightfully belongs to Mexico. Well, what are the facts? Well, one thing that many people don't realize is that there were several declarations of independence for an independent Texas. The first being done by the Gutierrez-McGee expedition in 1812. The next by the Long expedition in 1819. Mexico formally didn't exist until 1821. Which existed first? 1812, 1819, or 1821? That ought to tell you something. And, even before the Declaration of Independence at Washington on the Brazos, there was the Goliad Declaration of Independence. Now, this one rocks a lot of people's boats because it came out and it alienated some of the Mexican Federalists, because there was still a lot of debate in Texas going on at that time whether we should declare independence or fight for a different type of Mexico with allies in the northern Mexican states. And this was, December of 1835, just shortly after the Mexican forces had been chased out of Texas, and we were looking at what to do. Now, unfortunately, this came out, and then just a few days later, Austin declared for the independence of Texas, and this document was kind of hush-hush, hidden away until after the formal Declaration of Independence on March 3rd. Now, there was also another Declaration of Independence when Texas left the Union. Literally, we declared ourselves independent again and hooked ourselves up with the Confederacy. So, technically there were several declarations of independence. History does not support the idea that Texas was stolen from Mexico. You can argue that all day in terms of contract law, but in terms of historical dates, there was a movement for an independent Texas and declaring independence that existed before Mexico did. Now, another misconception is the whole idea that at the Alamo, Americans fought against the Mexican forces, and literally they wanted to turn it into something where it was about U.S. expansion. Now, let's take a look at it. Many of the men who fought at the Alamo were Mexican citizens. They had come here to Mexico and became citizens. This included people from 23 different states and also 6 countries: England, Wales, Scotland, Ireland, Denmark, Germany, and Mexico, and of course the United States. But they all came here, and so each of those countries could claim connection with the Alamo. I think it's kind of preposterous when, although I like John Wayne when he talked about the American flag at the Alamo. It was not at the Alamo. And in fact, people like David Crockett actually took an oath of allegiance to the Republic of Texas before arriving at the Alamo. Many of these men knew that the Republic was going to exist, and they swore an allegiance to it. Now, there's also some misconceptions about where the origin of this phrase, remember the Alamo, came from. What it came from, there were several speeches delivered to the Texian army prior to the Battle of San Jacinto. It was in those speeches that the phrase, remember the Alamo, came about. I have seen some sites promote the idea, this is just something that the soldiers said during the middle of the battle. Well, that's because they heard it in speeches right before that. Okay, and then another site. This one just kind of blew me away. The Texans rebelled against Mexico because they didn't like the ruler. Of course, the other thing is, they did it for slavery. That's another popular one now this day. This is why knowing what's in the Declaration of Independence is so important. It lays it out. The men made it very clear. They were tired of the citizens being seized by the military. The Mexican government had failed to live by the 1824 Constitution. In other words, they came here as citizens, and next thing they know, the Constitution is thrown out, and it's ruled by arbitrary decrees from San Jacinto. They were relocating criminals into Texas. I mean, literally, Santa Anna had a policy. He wanted people released from the Mexican prisons and settled in Texas near the colonists. Their property was confiscated. The Indians were often stirred up to attack them. Texians considered the government unstable. They lacked representation. I mean, prior to all the incidents of the Texas Revolution, their state Congress was dissolved by Santa Anna. They had no Congress. There was no representation. Can you imagine what would happen if you took out the House of Representatives and the people no longer had a voice? Would they be upset? Yes, they would be upset. You also had gun control. Along with that gun control, it wasn't just a matter of making a list of the guns. They were literally going around confiscating the guns from the colonists. There was no trial by jury. Freedom of religion was squelched. These are the reasons. It wasn't because they just disliked Santa Anna or they wanted to spread slavery. These were the reasons they identified in the Declaration of Independence. Most of these historians haven't read it, or they want you to believe something else. Granted, some of these men were slaveholders, but that was not one of the reasons they declared as to why they fought. Now, there was also some concern, why were the Texans so afraid of the Mexican cavalry there at the Alamo? Well, one reason is the Mexican cavalry consisted of a lot of lancers. And lancers, these men were very good with their horses. They would ride up on you with those long lances and run you through. This was a practice in the Mexican army that was a carryover from some of the days of Spain. And it was very practical. Out there on the plains, how else could you... you could cover more territory and enforce things with a lance. And then some of the people say, well, the Alamo was really not an important place. It had no military importance. Well, within that location, you had more cannons within that fort than any other fortification west of the Mississippi. People seem to forget that. There was a high concentration of cannons there. There was a reason for it to be there. San Antonio had long been a military center for Texas. Perhaps the Alamo didn't have strategic location in those historians' minds, but historically San Antonio had always been essentially the center of a lot of activity in the state and for the state going back to the Spanish days. I guess these people don't read the histories. But I wanted to go ahead and address these topics because, it's almost like my blood pressure goes through the roof when I have been doing research on the internet and I see this stuff that's being promoted that's leading a lot of people astray. Giving them the wrong ideas of Texas, like for instance, the Mexican-American War in a 16-minute nutshell, or the compact history of Texas. They take a lot of shortcuts and they leave out a lot of things. And when they leave out those things, you draw the wrong conclusions and you don't understand the full picture. But I wanted to go ahead and clarify those things so that you had some idea, because the more you know, the more you appreciate Texas and Texas independence and our way of doing things here. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have comments, questions, feel free to leave them below. I'll be glad to get to them. Thank you for tuning in. Feel free to go ahead and give it a thumbs up. When it gets on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe, because I will eventually get it onto the YouTube channel there at True Texas History. So until next time, this is Jeff Murrah, wishing you via con Dios, my friends. Goodbye.